There's a lot you can say about the upcoming Pyro system. It's dangerous, obviously. It's lawless, certainly. But it's not all just chaos and carnage completely. It's also people just trying to make their living where they can in a place that's challenging and pretty different from the adjacent Stanton system. From repairing your neighbor's generator to supporting the nearby farmers, there's much you can do to be a social and upstanding citizen for Pyro's prosperity.
So the planets of Pyro are different from Stanton in the fact that they all have to deal with the Pyro star system being at the end of its life cycle, emitting huge amounts of solar flare radiation, and we have to consider what is that actually doing to each planet. Naturally, Pyro 1, closest to the sun, is going to be the heaviest influence of the solar flare firing off. So how do those people live? But the people furthest away from the star on Pyro 6 are going to have the least amount of radiation, but it's also going to be super cold at the same time. How do those people live instead?
In Stanton, you have huge landing zones, which are very protected, very safe, lots of security. In Pyro, there's no such thing. You're very exposed to the danger. Everything is a lot more spread out. People aren't huddled into landing zones. They have the entirety of the system to roam across.
There are no central sources of power in the Pyro star system. It's all decentralized, and each outpost has its own different identity and what it means for you as a player as you go to these different places. Should you be aligned with one faction, you can visit these locations. Should you align with another faction, you can go to these other locations instead.
You've got a lot more to do there. So instead of going down, doing a mission, flying away again, you can go down, do a mission, do another mission, do a third mission, and then go to another outpost on the same planet and do some missions there. You have a much more involved experience.
So let's look at some of the places you'll be visiting. So farmsteads are a small slice of life within the Pyro star system to get you introduced to what it's like to live there.
Landing complete.
There are places to gather harvestables, places to complete your missions, and ultimately, your first introduction to how people live in the Pyro star system.
Farms are probably one of my favorite ones, just because I really like the vibe of them.
Is the closest thing to a home feeling I think you'll find in Pyro. You feel like there's a smaller community living here.
There's a lot more fields of crops, there's a lot more greenhouses. For the lawless ones, we've got these grub farm greenhouses, which are really cool as well. They tend to be in a lot more open, plain-like areas, big fields of crops around them.
There is things to do, there's things to harvest, but it's also just the vegetation that kind of sits on a lot of the desolate landscapes that we have in Pyro. Give you a little bit of this mini feeling of a little oasis.
There's one in particular on Pyro 2 that's really nice and has this really nice vibe, that kind of lazy windmill circling in the breeze on a plain that's just almost featureless apart from these few buildings on it. That really gives, especially at sunset, really gives an amazing vibe of these people live in the ass end of nowhere but are really trying to do their best to survive.
There are going to be some goods that are only grown in Pyro because of its unique star system that can be shipped back to Stanton.
We have a whole bunch of new mission types that you'll be able to do there. Then they're more geared around repairing pieces of machinery. We have what we call charge drain technology coming over from Squadron, which enables you to transfer an electrical charge from one component to another. So you can jump start a generator, for example. There's scope for much more gathering type of missions, like going out into the field, collecting crops. There's a big focus on non-combat at a place like a farm.
Next, let's talk about scrapyards. Scrapyards are one of the few locations within the Pyro star system where you can actually service your ship that is not on space stations or LEOs.
we'll have more scrap in a scrapyard, which makes a lot of sense. But we've got the towering cranes, the derelict spaceships in there, the skeletons of spaceships being pulled apart.
And we can see that there is a certain order to things, where things get disassembled and moved around, and where your aircrafts are getting refueled and repaired. There will be little shops as well to kind of get you on the way for your journey.
And we've got these large landing pits in all the scrapyards that are unique to the scrapyards, which are the big sort of sunken pits for repairing, rearming, refueling. They kind of bring that kind of unique, okay, this is a scrapyard because I know that there's a landing pit here, and they're the only types of outposts that have those.
Landing complete.
Here, you're able to interact with Chrysler services, refuel your ship, repair your ship, even rearm your ship as well. In addition to servicing your ship, you can also service the scrapyard itself. You've got to use your charge and drain tools to be able to repair pipes, repair canisters, any faults in machinery, etc.
It's very much about taking things apart and organizing them and shipping them off again.
But unlike the landing zones within the Stanton system, there is no air traffic controller. There is nobody to filter out where you can go. You simply choose a parking space, you land there, you service your ship, and you must fly out.
The new mission type that we have is salvaging, but in first person. So you don't need to be in a ship. It will be something that you can do on foot. So salvaging all the various panels which have turned up at the scrapyards in order to process them. Another piece of non-combat gameplay at scrapyards might be repairing machinery. We have a system which uses the resource network and engages it in missions. So you will be able to, for example, if there's a broken piece of machinery, you will be able to find a working piece of machinery, rip components and fuses and parts out of that, apply it to the broken one, and make that run instead. But of course, you've broken the first machine by doing that.
Without any landing zones in the Pyro star system, we're using scrapyards to be able to help service your ships so that you can navigate to other locations on the planet, as well as get back up into space as well. But the largest concentration of player activity is going to be happening at the trade posts. The trade posts are where the player is going to be dealing with trade and commodity, organizing themselves between different groups in order to purchase different food, water, ship weapons, ship components, armor, grenades, med pens, whatever, you name it, it can be found and sold here.
They focus quite heavily on hauling, delivery, and shuttling goods around.
Trader posts are organized by several different factions within the Pyro star system. At these different locations, you might find different inventory, different perks, different goods. So if you're aligned with Citizens for Prosperity, you might visit locations such as Jackson Swap on Pyro 2 or Conard View on Pyro 6. Conard View is in a very cold location that's very inhospitable, but people still need to be able to service and trade and do things around this planet. You can find different goods, different resources there, all being sold at this location. As Conard View is sheltered within a crater, it is also a safer location away from other headhunter gangs nearby, so you've got fewer people competing for your wares or trying to pirate from you either. Jackson Swamp is sheltered between these two different cliff bluffs, offering them lots of protection. And through there we went for a spaghetti western style main thoroughfare with lots of different landing pads around. And because it's well established, it's got some nice defensive measures so that it can't be immediately attacked by any rogue factions within Pyro.
We see in Jackson Swap, it's a hard environment that these people live in. It's not an easy living.
Visually, it echoes like the rest of the sort of art style that we call the sort of frontier art style.
If we look at the buildings, we see that there's a lot of stucco elements, there's a lot of makeshift little knickknacks that people have gathered from around the Pyro system.
It's a mixture of that hard scrabble life and people trying to make the best of what they have and repairing things over and over again and like replacing things that break.
You can see that the way that people are living there, it's very makeshift. Rooms were built to have a certain purpose, but have lost that purpose many years ago.
There's still that sort of decorative, artisanal, craftsman-like elements in there as well, with the rough weave rugs and things like that. So we're trying to really like push that homesteading vibe, in complete opposition to things like the space stations and Microtech, which up to now has been this very corporate, lots of metal, lots of angles, lots of edges, lots of sci-fi. This is supposed to soften off all those corners.
You as a player can land whatever size ship you have, purchase whatever size ship components and ship weapons you might want to have. You can visit the local warehouse or order any potential things that you might need to have, commodities, food, etc. Where anybody needs to be able to get something, purchase it, collect it. This is where all the players are going to be collecting. But maybe you align yourself with headhunters and you visit locations like Gonor Steel and Golem Riviera. Gonor Steel is a smaller outlaw trade post perched in Pyro 4's massive crater. It's there as a stopgap between Pyro 3 and Pyro 6 because there is not much landmass around Pyro 5. Pyro 5 is a gas giant, and yet you need to have a midway drop-off to get from Pyro 3 over to Pyro 6 on the far side because Pyro's star system is far larger than Stanton. Golem Riviera is one of those sleazy towns which is just full of seedy people, absolutely taken over by the headhunters. They've butchered everything, they've changed how they want things to work. Trade posts are possibly selling slave pods, you can find other illegal goods, but it's just a central hub of like sleaziness.
Don't judge them.
It is still built out of this minimal things that are laying around. It's very a hodgepodge of different things that come together. What makes Golem Riviera different is that now a tornado just went through the entire place. It is absolute chaos. Bits and bobs are laying around, things have rusted, and you will find mattresses of where people have been sleeping in the weirdest corners. We can see that the people that have been living in the space have really outlived this location a little bit.
The idea is that these are once prosperous outposts that have since been basically home invaded by the bad guys and taken over completely. So we use a lot of more fire and lots of spiked kind of cladding and rusty metal elements just to give that kind of, I hesitate to say Mad Max, but kind of that more apocalyptic vibe, I suppose.
Jackson Swap, even though it is very improvised, it has a certain structure underneath it. And Golem Riviera, this structure is nearly gone. It is really chaos, anarchy that this place really embodies.
The players coming to our locations should feel like they are encountering a whole new frontier where people feel a little bit on edge and they're curious about you, but they're also hesitant to meet you at the same time. There is no law, there is no jurisdiction, there is no protection. There is just you and people trying to get by and live their lives.
So, what did we learn this week? Well, hopefully that there's a whole lot more to Pyro than just being a jerk and destroying everything you see and touch. That while all the systemic gameplay systems of Stanton can be found there, Pyro arrives with a few new ones of its own. And that at launch, there are two primary factions that currently dominate much of Pyro's planetside. And your choice of allegiance will determine much about where you'll go and what you'll do with your time there. And if you were asking yourself, hey, do these two factions ever fight? Well, I'd say come back in 2 weeks to see not only how much they don't like each other, but how they both have to contend with the ongoing presence of Xenothreat as their neighbors. For Inside Star Citizen, I'm Jared Huckabee. Thanks for letting us share the people and process of game development with you. And we'll see you all here next week with a special Ship Showdown showcase look back at the work of superstar Gavin Rothery.